Welcome to People Potential with Amanda. Thank you for listening in today. I'm your host, Amanda Fleising, and I'll be bringing on various experts to discuss empowering individuals and organizations to achieve their full potential. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of People Potential with Amanda. Today, I'm thrilled to have René Tardif, who's the National Practice Leader, Search Solutions and Talent Management Services at Gallagher. Welcome, René.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
René, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to your current role?
Sure. I won't take you too far back, but I'm born and raised Edmonton, Alberta. I came into the search industry probably about 17 years ago, and I've not looked back since, really, quite frankly, and started with. In the search world, there are two models that exist. There's, I would say what's better known as contingent search, and that's the world that I started in. And there's retained search. And so those are the two models. And so spent a good 4 or 5 years in the contingent search space in Edmonton, working at the mid-management search level primarily. And, then transitioned and progressed from a career perspective into retained search, which, at the time was an organization by the name of Conway Ross Partners, which evolved to Optimum Talent, which has now evolved into Gallagher. So it's been quite a story, but for me personally anyway. But when I transitioned over to Conway Ross Partners, fundamentally that business, at the time had 3 offices, Calgary, Edmonton, and Regina, and was really largely focused on executive search, retained executive search. And so, those initial few years in contingent search was quite formative for that transition. But as years progressed, somewhat I would say moved up the ladder from a leadership perspective and from an accountability perspective, and built my own team and grew to become a partner within Conway Ross, and then moved over to being a partner and a shareholder within Optimum Talent. And then in November of 2020, we transacted and sold over to Gallagher. And so here I am today. Now I'm still running our search practice on a national scale. So out of our 14 offices, we've got our search practice that's present within 7 of those offices. And so I run that search practice nationally. I also, because I'm still passionate about search, I still have a small team here in Edmonton that's focused on the delivery or execution of executive search mandates, all within the private sector.
Amazing. Thank you. Thanks for sharing some of your story. And that leads us to, how does the search for executives differ from the search for first level managers?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And quite frankly, we actually, our model at Gallagher now has adopted conducting searches at a retained level for both, quite honestly. So, but I still do fundamentally believe that there's quite a big difference. And if we pause and look at the process itself, that's what would be a bit more, there'd be more depth around, actually conducting an executive search mandate, meticulous project management, right? So we go from, in a first level manager or mid-management level search, you're 6 to 8 weeks from start to finish on those types of searches. In an executive search mandate, you're about 12. So you're at least double, if not more, in terms of the time that you're spending in market, actively sourcing for candidates, the time that you're spending assessing candidates, and the time that you're focused on integrating those candidates into an organization is just all overall just more depth and more rigor. And so I think, some of those pieces that also tie in is, we don't necessarily offer Success Finder, as an example, as part of our process on the first level manager searches. It's more about who can we find, call it speed to market almost, right? So it's who can you find that you can move through the process rapidly, that you understand, fit into the scope of the role that you're looking for. Whereas, with the executive search mandates, you're spending a lot of time up front defining the role, you're spending a lot of time attracting candidates to the role. You're spending a lot of time assessing candidates, and that's where that whole piece of success finder comes in as well. And through that sort of assess phase with candidates. So by the time we present candidates, at the executive search level, we would have generally spent anywhere between 4 to 5 hours with each candidate from the moment we've had the first sort of introductory telephone conversation to the moment where we're debriefing with them on their success finder results. So
okay. And if we backtrack for people that might not know, what's the difference between the contingent versus retained type of search? So I know you switched from them between them, but what's the difference there?
Yeah, sure. So contingent search is you're typically it's an agreement that you enter with a client, but it's not exclusive. So a client might come to you and say, I need an HR manager within my organization, but they go and partner with 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 different contingent firms, and it's speed to market. Who can get the candidate to them that is best suited for the role in the most efficient manner? And if that candidate then gets an opportunity to interview with the organization and subsequently gets hired, then there's a one-time fee on the back end. But there's not a whole bunch of rigor, right, around that process of actually finding the candidate. It's kind of like who's in my back pocket, so to speak, right? Retained search is much different. So you're retained by your client. You're in an exclusive, call it partnership with them, and you're effectively focused on working or collaborating with them to identify the key accountabilities and responsibilities of the role, so defining the scope of the role, and then effectively we go to market and we have full disclosure of it's company XYZ, we're looking for a president, and we start overturning rocks, right? We look in our direct market, perhaps it's, if it's a mandate here in Edmonton, we'll look directly in Edmonton, then we'll expand it to the broader province, then we'll expand it to Western Canada, then et cetera, et cetera. And the whole purpose is that think of it of casting a net when you're fishing, right? You cast a big net and you're just pulling that net in, and you're seeing what kind of candidates you can actually generate through some of these conversations that are tied or very closely linked to that profile that you've defined with the client initially. And the purpose is that you build a pool of candidates, call it 10 in the end, that you present. And then from there, those 10 candidates are discussed with the candidate, presented to the candidate, and you narrow it down to a more manageable number that can be interviewed. And maybe that's 4 or 5 candidates. But the idea here is that by the time that you get to that point, those 5 candidates should be bullseye candidates. And so just in my description there, my sort of brief description, you can tell like there's a lot more time, energy, effort, rigor that goes into an executive search mandate process.
Absolutely. And am I right to assume that in general, the executive search process would be always or mostly the retained type of service? It's not like the one-time contingent service where you're competing against others.
Yeah, that's right. It's I think at that particular level, organizations, they're obviously making a big financial commitment, but they're also putting in place a fairly significant commitment of time to ensure that they're finding the right person. As I said earlier, typical sort of C-suite level, executive searches, they'll take anywhere between 12 weeks and up from there, depending on availability of candidates, depending on notification period to their employer, et cetera, et cetera. The other piece I'll just back up on is from a retained standpoint, there is a retainer. It's, almost like partnering with a law firm, right? And so if you go for legal services, there's a retainer up front, there's another sort of amount in the middle, and then there's a specific amount on the end when that transaction, so to speak, is done. It's very similar with us. There's our invoices are split into 3 installments. The first installment is due upon engagement. The second installment is due when we present candidates. And then the final installment is due when the successful candidate signs their employment offer.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense for both sides.
Yeah,
So
for sure.
let's shift into a lot has been going on over the last 2.5 years, as we all know. So, 9 to 5 has a totally new look and feel than it did 2 years ago. Employees have more flexibility in their schedules, but also in their locations. So you can be remote from anywhere in the world with working from home. Um, with that, given that shift, what would you say are some of the qualities that you look for when searching for executives for them to be able to manage this new normal? So, have you seen a big shift?
Yeah, for sure, right? And I think some of the qualities we tend to look for, if we just stop or pause on that, are, you know, we're tending to see a lot of organizations that require leadership that are, or leaders that are more empathetic, right? That understand how to deal with ambiguity a lot more, because a lot of folks are, quite frankly, if they're, they might have some colleagues that still have been working from home for now well over almost 2 years. And from a mental well-being standpoint, there's ups and downs, right, with that. And so I think leaders that understand how to not react necessarily in those situations, but know how to help manage and navigate some of those sort of uncharted waters with empathy, I think is really, really important. And I would say a quality that most organizations at the executive search level, anyhow, most organizations that we partner with are looking for in terms of their leaders. The ongoing need to understand how to build relationships, how to build good social connections. That is also very important, because gone are the days where leaders, can go into their offices, close their door, and just focus and look at sort of spreadsheets and numbers and what they need to do to address certain cost related issues. They need to be walking the halls a heck of a lot more now. They need to be building those relationships with their colleagues. And when I say walking the halls, it's getting on some of these Zoom sort of meetings on a daily basis, regularly, from start to finish, and ensuring that connectivity, that their colleagues are feeling that connectivity, and so from a relationship standpoint, super, super important.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more, like on having the empathy, but the collaborative side or relationship building, like creating genuine connections with your colleagues and your team members. And we can't have that open door policy anymore, because there is no door to see that's open, and it's a bit intimidating, even though you see maybe your CEO or someone in the C-suite that they're available online, and even who knows if they're really using, let's say, Teams or Slack. It's intimidating to reach out and just message someone. So having them be proactive and show up on Zoom calls, and it's different. It's a different skill set than, like you said, sitting in an office and working on the spreadsheets, and like even saying that I have an open door policy and having that door open, versus being much more proactive about it and empathetic about the well-being of everyone and sensitive to individual situations.
100%. And that requires vulnerability, right? And so, if there's another quality that I would say, and I'm not sure how you sort of would flush that out, in an interview setting, in terms of questions that you could ask, but it's just maybe more of a general quality that I think, leaders need to have, is that ability to be vulnerable themselves, right? And say that I'm not having a great day either, right? Or I'm not having a great quarter. And it's not because of, the financial performance of the business or what have you. It's more about, we're still stuck in, working from home, and I'm not able to have as much interaction with clients or whatever that might look like. But I think that vulnerability is important as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Showing up as your whole self at work, as I've heard over and over,
Yeah.
or seen on social media, absolutely applies and continues to apply. And everyone's affected in different ways. Everyone's going through different things, but it's nearly impossible at this point to completely separate your work life and your personal life. And so they kind of mesh and become one, and the more that you can be vulnerable and people can relate to you, I think the better leader you could be.
100%. Yeah, can't agree more. Can't agree more.
So, in assessing this, have you been able to use the Success Finder assessment to play a role in looking into these new competencies that are needed for the future of work and for today?
Yeah, 100%. And I think, I alluded to it earlier, and Success Finder plays a big role in our search processes, and not just in sort of being another step in the process itself, but it's actually a very valuable tool that, in maybe a sense, because by the time we get to the point in our process where we're having candidates go through the assessment, hopefully it should sort of corroborate what we already know about a candidate. But it's also helpful in the sense that sometimes it flags some of the shortfalls or shortcomings of a candidate's leadership style. And I think, that's as important to know as the good, right, in terms of their leadership capabilities. So it plays a really, really significant role in our process. We tend to introduce the tool between first and second round interviews, only because at the shortlist stage, only because we don't want to overwhelm the client with a whole bunch of data points, right? So we've got their resume, we've got, Gallagher develops their own tool, which is called a candidate self-assessment. And it's just themes from the position profile that we extract and build questions around those to help the candidate sort of reflect a bit on their experiences that they've had in their career and the responses that they provide. The client has access to those particular responses. And, on top of that, we provide a bit of a matrix on each candidate on some of the key points that we've observed from our conversations with them. So we don't want to overwhelm them with a whole bunch of data. So the idea is that, the first round of interviews is spent with a candidate focused really on assessing fit, right? Maybe a bit of technical aptitude as well, but it's more assessing, how do I think I can work with this particular individual? And then once we sort of, let's say we're interviewing 5 candidates, we move, 5 candidates, we narrow that down to 3 with the client. Then that's where Success Finder comes in, and it becomes very telling, right? It's, all right, we already knew this about the candidate, but here are some areas that, there's some challenges here. How do they overcome those challenges? How are they building adaptive behaviors to maybe not mask some of those challenges, but just be a bit more self-aware, right? And so it's been a really, I would say, valuable and useful exercise for us to go through with our clients, because then if you fast forward to the finalist candidate, from an onboarding perspective and a future professional development within the organization, it's such a very useful and valuable exercise for them to have access to that data and be able to have that candid conversation with the successful incumbent and say, hey, here are the results of your Success Finder. Some of the things that we, flushed out in our interview process, yes, but let's talk about, future and how we're going to overcome these particular challenges that have come up from a sort of future conversation standpoint with some of your direct reports, right? It's been a really, really valuable exercise for sure.
Yeah, I love that the assessment data could feed the interview questions. So, see what you need to dig into a bit more to see, like you were saying, what kind of coping strategies could they have, or how could they have have different behaviors that help mask a certain one that is flagged. So perhaps something is actually not that important, and like everyone is such a unique individual, so we learn so many wonderful things the more we talk to them, and in relation to their assessment results. And then taking all of that, and once that person is hired, and feeding it to their team, so that first they have the self-awareness, but then also their team knows how to work with them, and they could have those candid discussions for onboarding and for future leadership development, and like just continuous development has been a huge asset for many of our clients.
For sure. And, we've gone so far with some clients where, and it's been as a direct result of candidates that we've placed, and they saw the value in the tool and they said, geez, sure would like the rest of the leadership team, my future peers and colleagues, to go through this exercise. And that's then evolved into other work that hasn't been search related, but it's been around the notion of team effectiveness. Like if we're putting all of this information in front of us and we know sort of our strengths and maybe some of our pitfalls, gosh, it just makes for a much stronger leadership team down the line. And so it's been, like I said, it's just been a magnificent tool for us to use in our search process, but it's parlayed into other opportunities from a leadership perspective and leadership effectiveness perspective within organizations as well, client organizations. So it's been great.
Happy to hear. And I'd invite our audience to check out, we have 2 white papers that would be really interesting on this topic. So the first is the ladder of leadership, and it's a research on 3 levels of leadership and the competencies that are needed at each. So 2 competencies are fundamental, and there are different competencies that come and go at the 3 different levels. So what brought you to one level won't necessarily bring you to the next one. You have to have different competencies, and some people will naturally fit better at a C-suite level than a first level manager. So it might be a painful journey, but they can be well surrounded by an HR team or by their peers and their direct managers to help support that vision. And it's really interesting to see when you bring on someone at the first level, but their best fit is at that C-suite level, and really to support them in developing the competencies, but ultimately they'll be most natural and most comfortable at the C level. So many interesting findings from this research that was done with over 1,000 executives and leaders. So I'd invite people to check that out. I'll put it in the show notes. And then a second and our newest piece of research is on the agile mindset. And that goes with the first point that we were discussing with the new normal, remote work, and really needing to be more agile. So yes, more empathetic, more collaborative, and you could really dive into that. We did a research with agile leaders, high performers in agile transformation to see what does it take to be a successful agile leader or have a successful agile mindset. So you can check those links out in the notes. And René, let's move on to our next question. So what does hiring right the first time for an executive mean for the rest of the organization? I could imagine that there's quite an impact.
For sure. And listen, cost aside, because I mean, a poor hire, costs an organization, from a financial repercussion standpoint, but also from a time perspective, and delays a whole bunch of things. But hiring right the first time it's paramount for an organization, because it's now defines their ability to achieve or not, specific strategic objectives, whether that's in the circumstance of an operational turnaround, or maybe it's in the right sizing of an organization, or maybe it's, what we all hope for, which is, in the circumstance of growing a business. But I think if you're not hiring right the first time, that is all in jeopardy, because, and it doesn't matter what role at the executive level, because it all has ramifications if it's not done right the first time.
Absolutely. Like from, of course, the financial standpoint and the cost alone of having to start over and hire someone new, not having anyone in the role for so long, the loss of productivity, but also the loss of morale and the effect that it could have on company culture. So definitely important to hire right the first time. And that's why you should hire a search firm with proven success, like Gallagher and René and his team, of course. So
well, listen, if you keep talking like that, my head might not fit in this whole screen here, but yeah.
There's tons of space around you, we can keep going. But I've only heard great things, so I'm really happy to recommend the services of your team. And we all know, like it's hiring is so competitive these days. It seems like more than ever. So really having the support of professionals is incredibly valuable.
Well, listen, I mean, I obviously maybe a bit biased on that front, but I would agree. Like it is incredibly competitive right now, and not just at the individual contributor and mid management level. It's right the way through to your executive and C-suite level. Mandates that are out there, and it's not just unique to us. That's trying to go out and find these types of candidates. Every organization that I speak to, they've tried to go out on their own and find these particular hires and executives on their own, and they're struggling. It's just not an easy market, and we're often finding ourselves even in a circumstance where we're having to plan for plan A, plan B, plan C, because that's how much movement there is in the market right now and how much activity. So
Yeah, absolutely. So knowing how important it is to hire right, especially well at every level really, but probably the most costly mistakes are at the executive level. Do you think a healthy work culture starts at the top? So how important is it to hire someone that will be an add to the company culture or bring on that aspirational culture?
yeah, absolutely, right. I think the right leader that comes in will be the right ambassador to help propel the desired culture throughout the organization. So that think about permeating sort of that information, that not information, but that culture, desired culture throughout the organization. And that goes back to what we were saying or talking about earlier about at times being vulnerable, right? And saying that it's okay if you're not feeling okay, and or conversely, building a culture where it's not always about work, or again, it could be no, today we really need to drive, and here's a leader that needs to really corral the team and have them focus on this is our the specific targets, or whatever that might look like. But it absolutely does start from the top, but that vulnerability and empathy is still important. It can't be lost.
Absolutely. And this brings me to my final signature question for our
Mm.
People Potential podcast. So it's really, how do you unlock your own potential, Renee?
So me personally,
Yeah.
okay, all right. Geez, I think for me, it starts with building good general habits, and what I mean by that is positivity, caring, strong work ethic, and understanding the importance this has on my own success, right? And so, so I think about, I think generally I've always been a fairly positive person, but I think it's important to remind yourself on a daily basis that, that the attitude that you exude can have an impact on those that are around you, whether it's in a virtual setting, whether it's in a in the flesh type setting, right? And so I think that's one of the more important things. The second piece that I think is important to unlock your potential is if you experience failure, and I'm going to use failure because a lot of people are like, oh, I don't like that word, but if you experience failure, you get tripped up in life or your career, it's important to learn from it, right? Figure out how you can use that, maybe not to your advantage, but just to help you grow as a person, as a leader. Again, I think that's helped me through my career. Have a plan with specific measurable goals, right? Revisit them frequently. Track your own performance. Hold yourself accountable. I think these are all things that, for me, again, are important. Have a purpose, right? So I'm going to use my own example, right? When I got into search, I fell into search. I mean, I was in university, finished my undergrad. I was considering, doing a second undergrad, and because I wasn't too sure what I wanted to do. But when I got to working and fell into search, I immediately, I'm going to say, fell in love with it because, search provides me the opportunity to do what I do best, which is help people and help organizations achieve their growth potential. And so that's a bit of the purpose that drives me day to day, and why I really do enjoy what it is that I do. And I'll end with the last point, which we've touched on a little bit through the conversation today, but I think, it's important to be self-aware, right? I cannot think of a better way to help sort of unlock your own potential by knowing some of your shortcomings, your shortfalls, right? And again, we touched on this in terms of how Success Finders, I would say helps us in terms of our process of identifying that within certain candidates, right? Or within candidates that we put through the assessment. But I think that's really an important thing for a lot of leaders to pause on. And I think that will help you understand, some of the gaps that you need to have filled that may not be within your skill set, right? And that means just, others that you need to surround yourself with. So anyway, I'll stop there.
Thank you so much for sharing those incredible tips. I know I feel inspired, and we'll share them on the show notes, and we'll be writing a whole article based on our chat today as well for people who would like to read as well and get all the links. So René, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today. I appreciate it very much.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks for having me. I really do appreciate it as well.
Thanks for joining us on People Potential with Amanda. I appreciate each and every single listen and view. If you've enjoyed this content, it would really mean the world if you could leave us a 5-star review. This will make a huge impact in increasing the visibility of this podcast, on top of brightening the day of a few people here at Success Finder who work really hard behind the scenes to make this all happen. We're continuously working on new episodes, so be sure to hit the subscribe button so you won't miss a thing. Until next time, stay curious.